session of the Generate 4.2 release. We'll highlight, let's go to the next slide, please, Dan. So we'll highlight some of the changes in the 4.2 release and why you might want to consider upgrading sooner than later. Also, we'll discuss what's going to be in the 5.0 release. That'll be for probably mid-summer timeframe. We'll look at the release schedule and open up the discussion to get some feedback. Next slide. So Johnny Cunningham, very happy to have him with us today as our senior ETL developer, implementation specialist, and guru of many things. And Nathan, our senior solutions architect, they're going to talk a little bit about what's in the 4.2 release. So I'm going to hand it over to one of those guys. You can go to the next slide, please.
All right, so probably the biggest thing that you'll see in this release is a refined migration process. We spent some time working on optimizing the way we move data between staging and the data warehouse. We really slimmed it down, so now the data is going from the staging directly into the fact and dimension tables. And there's no impact to anybody around this. We were able to maintain the same execution process. So you still continue to execute the ETL using the same wrapper scripts that move data between staging into the data warehouse. But the pathway on the back end that data takes is faster, more efficient, and easier to validate. So we only scoped that to the child count files for this release, but this is a process that we'll be continuing with into all the other file specs. So that's definitely the major thing. We also had some other UI related components that we cleaned up. There were some issues with the date selector tool in the toggle page, and we made that more user friendly. And Johnny, do you want to talk about these last two to kind of wrap up our list?
Sure. We do have quite a few states that are looking at least membership or attempting membership or maybe tackling it for the first time. So we did have a change in membership where we had to coordinate the grades offered for the student with the grades offered for the school. So when that was uploaded as part of 39, as part of the directory migration, matching that up to make sure that the student's grade is valid in the school's grade grouping. So we have that change for 52. And then 33 and 35 are also spring files. We had a couple of changes in those in the report logic to get those up to where they need to be. And then outside of that, we have things, we have some changes in for like 86 firearms. There's a couple of changes that went in for that. And these are files that have already been submitted. We had a couple of changes go in for, I think it was like 129, a couple of the organization, the directory files, not 29, but some of the other directory files. And then all the rest of the changes are for things that are coming up in the fall.
All right. I guess we'll save the questions for the end of the meeting, but let's go ahead and go to the next slide and we'll start talking a little bit about the Generate 5.0 release. So do I have a date on that? Well, we'll look at the date on that in the next slide, but so this is a list of the file specs that are potentially going to have some updates to them. So our next release, as you can see, that on a large part, we're focusing on our November 2nd due date. And so any sort of changes to EDFACS file specs in regards to this list of files, we'll be looking at those. And of course, any implementation findings that we have out in the field while we're implementing, we will include those as part of the 5.0 release as well. And let's go to the next slide. Going pretty quickly, but that's okay. So of course, 4.1 was released in January. We are releasing 4.2. We're doing a soft launch this week. So just to verify that everything's good. And then there'll be some release notes out on the website soon if they're not already there. And we have already started to work on the 5.0 release. And so within the 5.0 release, as mentioned, our November file specs will be focusing on those, in particular our IDEA. We'll also be incorporating our annual CEDS updates in Generate. So each year there are changes to CEDS. And so we like to stay current with that. And our implementation support tickets will also be in 5.0. And then 5.1 will be our December files, which on a large part are assessment related file specs that we'll be focusing on in 5.1. And then in 5.2, we'll be looking once again back into our January, February timeline for 2023 and any file specs that would have updates associated with EdFacts and some implementation support as always. Right, and let's go to the next slide. And that wraps up what we had to share with the group today. Wanted to open this up to our participants to get some feedback or try to answer any questions that you might have. So feel free to put something in the chat or to come off of mic. That would be great.
Hi, this is Rick Bergeron from Maine. I do have a question.
All right.
We are in the 5.0, 5.1, 5.2 schema releases. Do you plan to implement the changes that we're having with Maine that are, Johnny could probably respond then on a little better than I could, but the responsible district versus the attending district issue that we have. Any file that we have that contains a grade, we can't do because of the way Generate calculates it.
Yeah, and I can speak to that one because I'm working with Rick now. Timeline wise, I will have to check, but what Rick is talking about is in Maine, they have, so we have LEA grade levels and school grade levels. The way Generate has worked up to this point is we take all of the school grade levels and we roll that up to the LEA. So across all of the schools for a particular district, if across all the schools they offer, you know, kindergarten to 12th, then the LEA grade level would be K to 12. And in Maine, they have a situation that's unique to the states that we worked in thus far, where the LEA grade levels do not necessarily equal the rolled up school grade levels. And Generate was not set up that way, so we had to add some additional elements to CEDS to handle LEA grade levels by themselves instead of them being a rolled up value from the school. That part has already been done. So CEDS has already been updated to accommodate that. We now need to do the code change within Generate to actually migrate in LEA grade levels as a separate data set, as opposed to just the school grade levels that ultimately get rolled up. I don't know time frame. I'd have to go back and look at, because we're prioritizing all of our tasks and tickets and all of that work, but I would assume we should be able to get to that in 5. But again, I'd have to go look and prioritizing everything that we have.
I'd also add to that Maine provided some good feedback regarding the upgrade process. You know, we've had troubles in the past with configurations not being accurate, so that which leads to issues with the upgrade. So we're going to be looking at what we can include in the 5.0 and 5.1 releases that will make that process easier. Things like a pre-upgrade checklist, have the system evaluate, are there any issues with your configuration, you know, that we can detect before you begin your upgrade process. That'll make it easier. You resolve those problems before you even attempt to do the upgrade. So some of those more system usability features we'd like to include in the near future as well. And then just one last thing I wanted to mention, we are going to be doing some additional, we've been building a large set of testing for the file specs. Yep, you bet, Dave. And then we are also looking to have those tests run automatically so that as the system is run, rather than us having to run them manually, every so often, we'll get like a daily report so that if we break a migration for a file specification, we'll know that there's a problem with it the following day after we've made that code change. So that hopefully will come out in version 5, but it kind of depends on what other priorities arise based on state feedback and the file specs, which are always our primary focus.
I see David smiling, so that's good. We appreciate the feedback, David, on that.
Yeah, I really thank you guys. You were responsive, you were cordial and willing to listen. It's a benefit to everybody. Thank you.
Yeah. It's always nice if you can solve a problem for one person and it helps others. Any other questions regarding the release? Implementation questions?
I have a question. I'm a Generate newbie, as well as a SEDS newbie, and I am wondering if you can just give me a real high level of, the SEDS version 10 is out, and how quickly should I be migrating to SEDS 10 in conjunction with what I have with Generate? Is 4.2 compatible to SEDS 10, or where should I be?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the CEDS data models that we use specifically for Generate are more directly linked to the data warehouse version, and that release should be coming out in the summer timeframe, June or July. So once that is released, then we'll have a process where we upgrade Generate to that version. So it's nothing you necessarily need to do on your side. And I know you use the CDS IDS in your state. So the process of upgrading your IDS can move forward in its own pace. Generate has the data warehouse, which is a separate data model, and we have kind of a loose binding between those two, so you don't have to worry necessarily about the version of the data warehouse, it being upgraded to 10, and the version of your IDS being upgraded at the same time. They can kind of go at their own pace. But our commitment is to make sure that Generate stays up to date on the latest version of the data warehouse model that's posted out to the open source community. So we're probably looking the 3rd or 4th quarter of the year for the release of that upgrade.
Okay, thank you.
Very good question.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions that they want to ask our team?
So, John, I was just going to jump in if nobody has any questions, because I certainly don't want to cut off a question. Nathan mentioned some of the testing things we are doing. There was something I wanted to mention that we hadn't talked about, and the office hours kind of started as this was transitioning in. We added a set of debug tables for those of you that are doing this kind of work, and I think it's going to be beneficial as we're now looking at membership and child count. Just be aware that they're out there. Because we didn't get to discuss these in the first office hours, it was sort of right before that. But there's a set of debug tables that are now available in the Generate database. So whenever you complete a migration, at the point that the data is going to be aggregated and put into the report table, the actual student list that makes up that aggregated number is written out to a debug table that matches the file specification level, and the category set or subtotal group. So you have the student ID and the values that make up that category set. So if, for instance, it was race and disability, you would have the student ID, the race, and the disability in that table. So you can quickly get the students and their relevant data that make up the aggregated number that Generate produced. So it makes it much easier when you're trying to validate Generate numbers, say, for instance, against your legacy process, because you have the exact students that make up the Generate number, and then you can match that to your legacy set of students and identify exactly which students might be different between the two, and then investigate them directly. So just to make people aware that those debug tables are available out there, and then you can start leveraging them, like as we're working on child count and membership now and everything else going forward.
And I would imagine those tables are truncated each time the process is run.
Yes, every time you run a migration, if the table, well, it doesn't matter. It's going to delete it if it's there and then recreate it with the new data that you just migrated in. And if you've never done that migration before, then it creates it for the first time. And then it just continually removes it and recreates it as you rerun a migration.
That's great, Johnny. So what you're saying then, it clears everything out. So when you're looking at the data, you're looking at the most recent set of data.
Right. You are absolutely looking at the most recent migration of that particular report. And it matches up exactly to the file specification. So the table names, for those of you that do the EDFAC stuff, you'll easily be able to find the ones that you need. The table names match up to the year, level, and category set level of the report. So
Great. So will those always be debug tables, or do you think potentially those would become part of a, a canned report?
our ultimate goal is we would love to have them available through the UI so that as you, okay, again, this is what we're planning, so we've got to work this out, and we have lots of internal discussions about how we'd like to leverage these. But it's the first step because it gives us the data that we need, but we would like to have something in the UI potentially where when Generate the aggregated number comes up, that it's a link and you could click it and it would actually pull from those debug tables and present you on screen. These are the kids that make up this count. So this gives us the data that we need, and now we have to figure out the myriad ways we can leverage it to make it useful, and whether that's individual reports or whether it's links in from within the UI. I mean, we have lots of ideas. Now that the data is there,
Right.
we're going to figure out the best way to use it. And obviously, any suggestions, or as you start using these debug tables, we welcome all of that as we're trying to develop these new ways to leverage that information.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other questions today? Okay, so we do have a short survey. If you would, we're always trying to improve our meetings here. So if you would take just a couple minutes and give us your feedback on our meeting format today, that's really helpful. A good example is our first meeting. Feedback was to record these, so we are recording this meeting as mentioned. And so please do give us your feedback. We want to continue to improve our services and help you guys with your implementations. You should see the link in the chat, by the way.
All right, got it. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Darla.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep.
Thank you all.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thanks, everyone. Take care.